and then you just go back to operating as normal, there can be no transformation. Y'all don't hear what I'm saying. You don't hear what I'm saying. You got to hear it. Okay, so Peter was on the boat. Peter was on the boat, right? He was on the boat with Jesus and all the disciples. And he was on the boat and he was chilling, right? He was at a normal state. Everything was all right. Then all of a sudden, what happens? Here comes the storm. Now, some of y'all get mad at the storm and you just sit on the boat and wait for it to ride out. You just ride it out. But that's not how transformation occurs. Peter understood that the storm arising was his opportunity to find out what he was made of. And Peter used that moment to step out of his comfort zone and to step out into the familiar to do something he ain't never done before. Can I tell you today that what you're experiencing in this nation is an opportunity to step outside your boat. Look at your neighbor and say, don't just ride it out. Don't just ride it out. This is your chance to stand up in your power, to stand up in your authority, to step up to the plate and be the change that you want to see. There's a shift in consciousness. Those of you who have an ear to hear and an eye to see are aware that there's a shift in consciousness. There's awakening that is happening, and it is happening in our young people. It is happening in the younger generations. And if you don't stand with them, they will not respect you. If you don't support them and if you don't stand behind them, then they will not believe in the God that you serve. There is power in our understanding of God's presence with us. You're not called to just do little things. We got mediocre mindsets. You're not just called to go to work every day and make your few dollars and come home and put it in a box and figure out how you're going to spend it and how you're going to turn it over to make yourself rich. That's not your purpose. You have been called to stand up. You have been called to be a world shaker. You have been called to be a world changer. You have been called to do what looks like it's impossible. You have been called to stand in the gap. You have been called to speak out against the powers that be. You've been called. Can you tell your neighbor you've been called? You've been called. You've been called. You've been called. And so if we don't want to continue to operate as fools and frauds, there are some things that we've got to understand that we must do. And the first thing is we've got to examine our value system. Somebody say examine the value system. You've got to shift what's important to you. See, personal gain has become our primary objective. Getting for self, I, me, what I need, what I want. But you've got to shift your mindset. Our elders and our ancestors, they did not have the mindset of a me mentality. They thought about the community as a whole. And if it did not advance all of us, then it didn't advance none of us. And we've got to shift our mentality out of a place of personal gain where we use our talents and abilities only to serve ourselves to the point where we learn how to serve our community. We've got to examine our value system. We've got to examine the way that we are teaching and training our children up. You know, I call myself a soccer mom now because my kids have all kinds of activities all over the city. And I see some of these parents, they are slaves to their children. They are constantly running them around here and there and everywhere. They're in everything. They're in dance. They're in baseball. They're in football. They're in basketball. They're in karate. They're doing all of these things, but we have not taught them to reverence God. When I was young, if I didn't go to church, I didn't go nowhere.